Welcome to Shaped by Faith. I'm Theresa Rowe, where we shape our bodies and hearts for God's purposes. I'm so excited about my guest today, Julie Lavender. She's the award-winning author of several books, including 365 Days of Celebration and Praise and Creative Sleepovers for Kids. I love that. Co-author of Come and Behold Him. Her work has appeared in several anthologies and curricula, as well as many magazines, such as The Upper Room, Guidepost, Homeschooling Today, Parent Life, Clubhouse, Today's Christian Woman, and Focus on the Family. Julie has a master's degree in early childhood education, and she's taught public school in 3 states and delighted in homeschooling her 4 children in 6 states during her husband's Navy career. She writes faith-based articles for her local newspaper and is a regular contributor to several websites and blogs on parenting topics. Julie lives with her husband, David, in South Georgia, not far from the charming city of Savannah. And today we're going to talk about Julie's new book, 365 Ways to Love Your Child, Turning Little Moments into Lasting Memories. Welcome, Julie, to Shaped by Faith.
Thank you. I am so glad to be here.
I love your book. I've got it in my hand right now. For one thing, it is eye-catching. And I'm a color person. I love the greens on your cover because green represents health and newness of life. And I love the hearts.
Right, of course.
Yeah, so it caught my attention. And I started looking through it and I thought, gosh, these are things that every single parent and grandparent that is helping raise their grandchildren, they need this in their hand because it's so reassuring that you don't have to do extravagant things to show love to your child or your grandchild. And I love it. So at the end of the show, I definitely want you to let us know how we can get a copy of this book and some of your other books as well. But let's talk about your background a little bit, Julie. Tell us about your parents and growing up. What was that like for you?
Well, I grew up in on a farm. Not a huge farm, but my father leased out property. I grew up in a Christian home, though sadly, my dad chose as an adult, even though he went to church, not to go to church. So it was my mom and my grandmothers that encouraged us to strengthen our faith and to go to church. So I am so very thankful for that. My father was a Christmas and Easter, and maybe if our children's choir was singing a program, go to church kind of guy. And it was very sad for me. He wasn't a terrible father, but yet I just didn't see fruits of his faith. And so I was sad for him. I was very sad for him. Right. So, but growing up in that Christian home with very little money, I think I'd learned then to appreciate the little things. That's quite possibly what helped me learn to appreciate the little things.
Did your mother, obviously she had a key role in probably showing you love in those simple things. What are some of the ways that she showed you or gave you those meaningful affirmations of love?
Well, one thing she did, she was a seamstress, not by trade, but she could sew. And because we couldn't afford store-bought clothes, she made all of our clothes. And I always knew she made those with love. And she'd pick out fabric that she knew was either our favorite color or just little things like that I knew that she put thought into what she was doing. She also was a wonderful baker, and she liked to make things that she knew we liked to eat, like cheese straws and lady fingers and pound cake. And we'd stop every day at 10 o'clock. She was always having to do some kind of chore around the house, but she'd stop every day and we would watch I Love Lucy. It came on at 10 o'clock. We called that our tea party. That was our tea party. And she was just intentional back before we thought about being intentional or talked a lot about it. That wasn't a buzzword then, but she was intentional to sit with us. Granted, we could have been doing something other than watching television, but she did stop what she was doing. It was a formal little, I say formal, we had to have snacks and something to drink and eat. And we would just watch the show together, and we had to stop our playing and come and join her in the den. And so it was just little things like that. It was never big things because we couldn't afford them and they weren't as important to us. So she had a lot of little ways.
Sweet. Yeah, And a lot of children, and I would say back in our day, I'm in my, mid to upper 50s. Some parents didn't show their love. They just didn't. I mean, you knew they loved you, but they didn't go out of their way. And I say that because I was raised in a family that I knew loved me, but they didn't do anything like that, to
That was my
stop.
situation too. And some of it was lack of education, for a better word. We didn't have these psychologists and folks telling, and Christian educators telling us those things. So it
Mm-mm.
was the way we grew up, and that was my situation. I knew it. There was not a lot of ways shown other than those kind of ways, but I did know that.
Right. Okay. So you and your husband David have been world travelers. So I was going to ask you, what was it like living in all these different various locations across the country and moving frequently?
Well, and it's interesting that you say that because we didn't have very much money. We never traveled as much as a family. We didn't have money for vacations. Well, and I had never, but I always longed to travel. But then the interesting thing was I also didn't want to leave my hometown. So my husband and I met in high school, dated in college, and I thought, well, I'm never leaving my hometown, and he's just going to have to just agree with me on this. And so he was majoring in biology. I was majoring in education, and I thought, well, he'll find something as a biologist in my little tiny town. Well, then when he got his master's, mine was in early childhood master's, he was getting it in entomology, insects. And I'm like, okay, our little tiny town doesn't need an entomologist. I just really don't know what I'm
Oh,
going to do with this. Well, as I wasn't consulting with God, I was making these decisions on my own. I thought I needed to stay there. Long story short, my husband joined the Navy as a medical entomologist, and I kind of left kicking and screaming, but I also had a good attitude about it. And I absolutely loved it. I had never seen so much of God's beautiful world. We stayed mostly, our duty stations were stateside, but we did get to travel some in other places, and he traveled a lot of places. But God's world is so beautiful, including his plant life, animal life, and the people that I got to meet. I just absolutely loved every place I lived. If there was something I didn't like about it, I told myself, well, I'm only here 3 years. And I just learned to love it and had a blast. And I thanked God so much for giving me that opportunity to see more of his beautiful world.
gosh, God's plans are always so much better than our plans,
Absolutely.
aren't
You would think
they?
I'd learned that.
And we just have to learn to be obedient and step out there. That's incredible. So your teaching career began then. Were you teaching in these various locations?
I taught for 2 years back in here and because now we're retired back in our hometown. I taught for 2 years here in this area while we were both finishing our masters. And then I taught in Florida. So I taught in Georgia, Florida, and North Carolina before we had our own children. And then I became a stay-at-home mom.
Okay, so you decided to homeschool your children, right?
I did, and that came about in a weird way because I loved my public school education. I had no problems with any of the public education anywhere we were. It wasn't that at all, as much as we were moving every 2, 3, 4 years. One time we only stayed somewhere 1 year. And it just seemed like that was the best way to have one thing that was consistent in their lives. And I just loved having them at home with me and loved teaching them to read. And we just fell in love with it. It really worked for our family because with my husband deploying 2 weeks here, 3 weeks here, a month, 3 months, then when he came back, we wanted to be with him and spend a lot of time with him. So I'd cancel school for a day or two and we'd hang out with daddy. Then we'd go back to school when he was back at work again. So it was a wonderful situation for us.
Julie, my daughter homeschools her children. She started 2 years ago and she never thought she would love it and enjoy it like she does. And it's really, I've watched her, it's really brought her and her two children and her husband so close together. I mean, they do everything together and they enjoy their time together and children aren't a burden to her, and I just watch her and I'm so proud of her. I'm so glad she made that decision. And now she's homeschooling my other daughter's, who is an educator. She's homeschooling her two children. So it's amazing what God's plans are, because my daughter said she would have never, ever dreamed she would have ever been a homeschool mom. So
That was me too. That was another one of those things you'd think I'd learn about God's plans, but I did absolutely love every minute. Now there were days that were hard, but I loved it. I love the time we spent, and it creates such an amazing bond with the family. It truly does.
absolutely. Okay, we're going to take a break right here. So we will be back with more Shaped by Faith. Everyone stay tuned. Welcome back to Shaped by Faith, where we shape our bodies and hearts for God's purposes. On the phone is Julie Lavender. She is the award-winning author of several books, and today we will be talking about her newest book, 365 Ways to Love Your Child. And Julie, I'm really enjoying getting to know you. And we learned that you did a lot of traveling with your husband, and you homeschooled your children, and you're an educator. Now let's talk about your writing. When did you fall in love with your writing?
And that's interesting because we were talking about God's plans earlier, you and I. Writing was never on my radar, never. I've got so many writer friends that say, oh my goodness, I wanted to write since I was 4. That's not how it happened with me. I was teaching school, loving it, loved children's literature, just loved it. And I loved it as a child too. I was the one that when the Scholastic little papers came home, I was the one that bought the most children's books, even though we really couldn't afford that. But my mom would treat me to that. Loved children's literature. I read so many kids' books to my students, and I thought there were so many good ones. But at the same time, I found a couple of bad ones. I thought, the plot's not good here. The grammar's not great. The punctuation. And I can distinctly remember saying, if this book can get published, it must be easy. I know I can write a children's book. This has to be so easy. I can do this. Oh my gosh, was that the most erroneous thought ever? So by then, at this point, so that was while I was teaching, but by this point, I was a stay-at-home mom when I finally had the time to consider it a little more. I sent in a bunch of proposals that I thought were just the best books in the world and got rejection. But by then, the writing bug had hit, and I thought, I'm going to do this the right way. I went to a couple of writers' conferences. I researched. I learned what I should have been doing and started on the journey then. And I also learned that sometimes it's harder to get a book first. And so I started just then writing what I knew, which meant some parenting articles. Some of them were for no-paying magazines that then just gave me some writing credits. I wrote a couple of educational pieces, some curriculum for a homeschooling magazine. So I started slowly then and just worked my way from there.
Boy, I love your story. I tell you what, writing was not on my radar either. I write for our paper, faith-based articles, and I've written one book for Guidepost. And I thought, when I was writing the book, I thought, oh, I'm not going to need an editor. I mean, this is great. Boy,
God shows us.
Oh, yes. And then he crushes our pride.
Right. Because I might have needed it crushed in the first place.
Oh, well, I know I did. In 2014, you were one of 12 winners for the Guidepost Writers Contest. So what was this experience like for you, and where did it lead?
That was such another God moment, just so amazing. And I love to look back at the path, how I see God's hand in every step of my writing. And I know he's in every step of our lives, but sometimes I forget to look. But when I can look at my writing, I can so see it. So I was writing for my newspaper, and I found the coolest story to share. I was writing mostly faith-based articles, and it was a husband actually turned out to be the perfect match to donate a kidney to his wife. And as you know, it's usually a family member, but not a husband. So I thought, this sounds like a great Guidepost story. So I sent it off to Guidepost. Now, again, it was rejected, and I was just appalled. But then that writing bug hit, and I found out about the writing contest. So I entered a couple of things, and so I turned in several things. My daughter was getting married that summer. She was getting married early August, and we were supposed to find out the winners mid-August. And though we loved our son-in-law, it was hard for me to let that first child to get married go. And I was struggling a lot with that. Mm-hmm. And so I just concentrated after I got her married. I concentrated my efforts on looking forward to hearing from that. Well, after August 15th went by, I thought, oh my gosh, they said the middle of August. I guess I wasn't chosen. And in my mind, I was like, okay, I'm going to give them a couple of more days here. Well, sure enough, I was blessed to hear that I was one of 12 winners. And I just know that was God's way of allowing me to have a new focus and not be so sad about my daughter moving clear across to another state. And it is a marvelous experience. I went to New York for a week with the 12 others, and we learned how to write for Guidepost with the editors of Guidepost. And it was just, they treat you like family. It was a wonderful experience. And that original article eventually did get published in one of their publications. So that was really fun. But they're a great company to write for.
Oh, that they absolutely are. And like you said, they do treat you like family. I mean, that's for sure. Now, several of your works appears in Homeschooling and Parenting websites and magazines. So what do you write about for these publications?
Well, for the homeschooling ones, I loved being able to do unit studies and curriculum and some fun things like that. And it was things I had done with my children. I always incorporated literature with that. For parenting, I try to write either tips and suggestions for celebrating a silly holiday, which is one of my things that I love doing with kids, or just some way to encourage them, because, parenting is such a hard job. It is the most rewarding job, but it's such a difficult job. And I feel like sometimes, especially now with so much social media, we can really beat ourselves up if we're not the Pinterest mom of the day. And I just like encouraging families, because I feel like that's where God uses us so much, to start off with our family, and that families are so important. And I just love encouraging them in different ways. And that's almost always my focus, to show them God, to keep them going, encourage them, and just help them to have fun making memories.
Well, you're spurring one another along, and that's what we're called to do. I love your book. Let's talk about it. 365 Ways to Love Your Child. As I'm reading through it and looking at it, it is a great resource for anyone wanting to turn moments into lasting memories for a child. And there's so many things in here. I'm like, oh, wow, I hadn't thought about that before. So what made you decide to write this book, and why?
I loved spending time with my children and making memories. And as they got older, I realized so many of the little things we did with them were the most impactful. They made the best memories. My youngest, we used to, if we ever lived near a stream, or if we were ever hiking and we saw a stream, we would each collect a stick, which meant that was 6 of us, 4 children, my husband and I, and we had to find our own stick. And they had to be different enough that we could recognize our own stick, and we would throw it in at one of the end of the stream and run down, a good bit to see whose stick made it there first. And if not all of them made it, then we'd have to backtrack and see which one got stuck in the mud or whatever. And it just became those little memories, chasing fireflies, skipping rocks to see who could manage that. One time we went on a vacation, and we did take some vacations while we were in the military, and this one was to an amusement park. And I remember after the vacation, I said, what did you like best about it? Might have been Disney. I don't remember which park. I said, what did you like best about the trip? And my oldest son spoke up, and he said, jumping from one bed to the other in the hotel room.
Oh my gosh.
I thought, oh my goodness. And I thought we could have saved money, couldn't we? But and we let our children jump on the bed. That wasn't even the thing. But they had 2 beds close together. They would jump from bed to bed. My husband and I stood so they wouldn't get hurt. We pretended there were alligators. It was a moat. It became a castle. They had the best time. And that's what they remembered about the vacation. So I just learned quickly that it's the little moments, and those little moments of showing love to a child can give our children a glimpse of the Heavenly Father's love. If we will just show them those little moments and let them know we treasure them, we value them, they are important to us, and they are important to our family, then we can say, you know what, as much as I love you, it doesn't even come close to the way the Heavenly Father loves you.
That's good. Julie, what about those parents that, they're listening, they're like, well, I didn't do that with my children, raising them, but now I have grandchildren. What would you say to them?
And I would say we can still do those things because, and it may even be long distance. My only grandchild so far is a long distance, but we FaceTime, and he's only 2. He's not going to remember some of these things, but we can talk about them later and it will be a great memory. So we have the beauty of FaceTime or telephone calls or something like that, and we can do those things. And then, and even when I spend time with him, we recently kept him for them to go for an overnight for my son-in-law's 30th birthday. And to me, that was showing love to my child. Besides showing love to Benaiah, my grandson, that was showing love to my daughter, that I valued her enough for my husband and I, for him to take off work and for us to go spend time with her son so that she could go off with her husband. So even though our kids are grown, we can still find ways. It might not be one of these silly ways in my book, cutesy for children, but we can still find ways to show them love. I think there's always an opportunity.
Absolutely. Let's take a break. We'll be right back with more Shaped by Faith. Everyone stay tuned. Welcome back to Shaped by Faith, where we shape our bodies and hearts for God's purposes. Well, Julie Lavender is on the phone, and we're talking about her newest book, 365 Ways to Love Your Child and Turning Little Moments into Lasting Memories. I love everything that you shared with us, Julie, in that last segment about just showing those affirmations of love, and they can be really simple, but very meaningful at the same time. What have you learned from writing your books and your stories and your articles?
Well, I think the main thing I've learned is that it's a journey and it's not a race, because I've written for a long time, but part-time while I was homeschooling my children. I've tried to follow God's path, and I've learned that if I ever try to rush ahead of myself and get ahead of God, that it's not going to work out anyway. If you do have a message that you feel God is leading you to write, I still say make sure that this is what God wants you to do. I have a couple of friends who have been disappointed they haven't gotten published right away, and I think they will eventually. But I think what they have to remember, a really good writing friend of mine just said recently, don't get ahead of God. Do you want to birth an Ishmael or do you want to birth an Isaac? Make sure it's God's plan. Pray, and if this is what's meant to be, then it's going to work out. But persistence and perseverance, that's exactly what I've learned with my writing.
That's good. I love that you said it's a journey and it's not a race. I think with my own writing, it's like, I hurry up, I've got an article due, let's do it, I'm going to put in this amount of time and then boom, I'm done. I don't think I enjoy the process. So I think what you just said just helped me. I appreciate that. I want to ask, where can we find your books and where are you on social media?
Any place books are sold. Now, my publishing house, Baker Publishing Group, I think they still have it on sale. It's a very inexpensive book, in my opinion. And so they have it on sale, but it's also any place books are sold. I am at julielavenderwrites.com. And then I'm also on various social media as Julie Lavender, and I would love to connect with people. I love to talk homeschooling, writing, military, parenting children. I love talking to friends.
So what's next for you, Julie?
Well, you know what? I still have that dream of a children's book. I just am determined to do that. My husband, with his biology background, we're hoping to do some faith-based curriculum for children about insects and bugs and some of God's wonderful critters.
My grandchildren love insects. They're fascinated with them. And, we need some good children's books out there, especially faith-based. I mean, sometimes they're hard to find. So I believe that maybe the next time I talk to you, you'll be writing that.
Well, I certainly hope so. It's been a dream for a long time.
So God has definitely inspired your writing. And how would you encourage someone out there that they're writing and they're journaling, and how would you encourage them? I know you said persistent and keep going, but how else would you encourage them just to continue on?
Exactly. Don't give up. God may only want you to be writing for yourself. That might be the only place your writing goes. But if that's not the case and he has other plans for you, don't give up. And I would encourage people to write where you are. Mine was parenting, so I wrote for parenting magazines. Every little credit that you add, every little accomplishment with your writing builds your resume, and then you can get more and more involved with your writing. But don't give up. Be persistent, but pray, pray, pray. I pray before, during, after. Ask God to lead you with whatever you're doing with your writing, and I firmly believe He will do that.
Absolutely. Julie, you've been so enjoyable to interview today. I'm so glad we got to connect. And I'll talk to you, let's say in 6 months, and see where you're at then. How about that?
Oh, this has been so much fun, and I would love to chat again in 6 months. Thank you so very much.
Oh, you're welcome. And thank you for listening. I'm Theresa Rowe. Everyone have a blessed day.